hard for us to understand what it means to be part of an order, and especially an order in the church. We might understand what it is to be part of the military, some of us, but it's a very that's a very different kind of order. Um, and I was preparing for this talk, and I thought about the fact that, part of being an order in the church means that we're in harmony with the church and with its teaching and with its hierarchy. And then I realized, well, wait a second, the hierarchy, they're all in the sacrament of holy orders, which is a different sense of the word order, but maybe something that helps us to understand and come to terms with what it means for secular Franciscans to be part of the secular Franciscan order. And it's something that certainly I have to come to terms with, being a member of the Order of Friars Minor. And you know, one thing I was thinking about, I have a friend who has cats, and she has a corgi dog, and she said, corgis are herders. They're bred to herd. They're cute little dogs, but apparently they do a good job of herding animals. They can, if you get two corgis, they can herd a cat. Unfortunately, the cat becomes neurotic, and so I was thinking about that, and how herding Franciscans is kind of like herding cats, and therefore maybe sometimes we become a little neurotic when people try and herd us, make us too consonant and harmonious together. But I do think that it's important for us as sentient creatures to come to terms with that, and to try to prepare ourselves for the feelings that we might have, and the other dimensions of that experience of recognizing we've committed to be part of an order, and that we want to be in harmony with the church, and sometimes it's difficult to figure out how to do that. So I was thinking about how one of the first things I had to do when I was a provincial spiritual assistant was to go to a region and help a fraternity that had its own sense of formation come to terms with the fact that the region was insisting on certain things. And many of you have probably dealt with this in your regions, maybe before you were even regional minister. It might have been a conflict, because a lot happened when the fund manual came out. And so, I sat down and with the fraternity, and I just explored with them a little bit of what being part of an order meant for the church and for them. And so, one thing about being part of an order is that we have to be, well, ordered in some way. We have to be coordinated, not just with each other at a local level either, but being an order in the church, we have to be coordinated with each other in the order. That's for all of you secular Franciscan order. And we also have to be coordinated with the church. And what does that mean? Because across the church, there's, you take any contentious issue, and you've got a whole bunch of people who are saying sometimes opposite things. So people, even preachers, even priests will sometimes spout heresy. Like 80 or 100 years ago, there was a priest that was I forget if he was in New England or Michigan or someplace, but anyhow, he was spouting a heresy that there's no salvation outside of the visible Catholic Church. And he was censured, and this was before the Second Vatican Council, right? And so, sometimes people take something that's true and they blow it out of proportion. They take it in a different direction because they take it out of context. And really, most heresy is that, right? The disorder of bad preaching is taking a small thing out of context and reinterpreting it in a way that moves people away from the truth. So, so to be coordinated with the rest of the church, when sometimes our experience of the church is that the church itself is not coordinated. Well, the church has a sense of how to figure out right and wrong. And some things it takes time, sometimes centuries, to figure something out. And in other cases, you just have to look to the right people because the decisions have already been made and they've been consistent throughout the centuries. If you take an issue like same-sex union and the inability of the church to bless same-sex unions, there's a dispute in the scholarship, but you'll only hear one side of it in the news. And you'll hear about what the church says now, but you'll hear about scholars sometimes saying, well, there was this brother making ceremony and everything. And when someone wrote a book about that, you never heard the scholarly reply that that person was ignoring the preaching of St. John Chrysostom and many others, that brother making ceremony was specifically not for that purpose. And so you can tell in the history of the church that this was a dispute, which also puts the lie to other people's claims that same-sex unions, a romantic sense of all of this love, is a modern invention, because it isn't. I mean, there's love poetry that goes back millennia. So obviously people love other people, and that's not a new invention, whether it's opposite sex or same sex or anything else. It goes back millennia. So it's important for us then to be grounded in how the church discerns where the truth is. And that, of course, means that we have to be grounded in scripture, and we have to be attentive to understanding scripture in the light of Christ and through the mission and ministry of the church. So we pay attention to what the Pope says and the magisterium as a whole, even when one bishop might say something else that's more amenable to what we wish the church would say. And we have to be respectful of it. There was a recent intervention. I guess I was part of a discussion because I was being asked for advice, where a priest had made a presentation in a local fraternity, and he had been very disrespectful of a different point of view. One of the things I was reminded, it concerned Duns Scotus and what Duns Scotus taught that was different from Aquinas and Anselm and all of them. So I talked to a Scotus scholar, and she said, above all, Duns Scotus would have been respectful of Anselm. So, part of that sense of being in order is also that we're respectful of other people who might have different points of view. And not just respectful in the sense of being obedient to the church, but also respectful in the sense of how we choose to talk about other people. My personal preference about most issues is that things be open and on the table. And so this is a dimension of being part of an order that is very difficult for me, because I would like to just lay everything on the table and say, okay, here's everything that we have, and have a broad collection of people look at it and hear a lot of opinions and sort things out that way. I'm not sure that that's healthy for most people in most organizations, but that's my personal preference. But I was realizing as I went through seminary formation, and now that I'm on a provincial council, and last night we had an executive session of the NEC, I keep getting reminded that there are a lot of things that we actually have to keep in our hearts, and we can't say anything about them to very many people. We can take them to our spiritual directors, God bless us. I hope, I hope that everybody who has a difficult position of authority has one. Um, you know, and and wrestle with how we have to deal with them. But there are a lot of things actually that we have to just keep in our hearts. And that's also part of being the order. And you probably, each of you in your own regions probably can think of at least one thing that you've dealt with while in leadership that you have to keep quiet and private and confidential, maybe sometimes even from other people who are involved in leadership at your same level. And so I just want to leave you with that reflection, just to let it sit in your hearts, the importance of being part of an order and the struggle and the difficulty of it, but the importance of allowing yourself, each of us allowing ourselves to wrestle with it properly, and not to abandon, but rather to be vigilant and persistent about coming ever closer to being coordinated with the rest of the church, and within our, among ourselves as an order, to be coordinated with the other elements of leadership in our order, to be discerning and at times even directed by other leadership. For example, when a bishop makes a ruling, sometimes that has particular implications. Like for our order, there was a friary that where some of the friars were doing Reiki, and the bishop is the head bishop for that state said Reiki is not in harmony with church teaching. And so the friars, even though they didn't live in his diocese, they chose not to do Reiki anymore out of respect for the fact that he was the head bishop of the bishops of the state in which they lived. And to be willing to be directed and to give up something that you love, that you think is good, out of the sense of harmony of the church, is one of those dimensions of leadership that I think is very challenging for us Americans, and yet very important for us to keep in our hearts and to wrestle with. So again, I think you know what it is to be seculars and what it is to be Franciscans, but it's good for us to reflect every once in a while and to face the challenge of being part of an order.